All right, guys, welcome to our Amplified Solutions webinar focused on follow-up boss pawns. Excited to dig in on pawns. My name is Lee Adkins. I am joined today by Bridget Ahern, our Director of Client Success.
Hello, hello.
All right, Bridget, we're going to just go deep. So last couple of webinars, we've gone pretty wide and covered a whole bunch of topics, but today we're going to just do pawns.
Yes, we're only swimming in ponds today.
That's right. That's the plan. So, Bridget, tell us, what is a pond? Let's begin at the beginning. What is a pond?
Start from square one. I like it. A pond is essentially, and so in Follow Up Boss, all of your agents' leads are assigned to them, and they're exclusive to them, with the exception of people who are admins and owners, who they can view all of the leads within the database. But agent leads are agent leads. Once you put somebody into a pond, it opens up that option for other agents to be able to view that contact profile as well, instead of being exclusive to just a specific agent. And so it could be good for getting things off of your radar that you want just specifically in your own pipeline. Or, as you guys will learn today, there are a ton of other sneaky little use cases for ponds to really build out your system and make sure that you've got the right people in the right places.
Absolutely. And we find more every day. I think we may have found more when we made this guide that we're going to share with everybody.
Yeah, it's always learning things in Follow Up Boss. It's a blessing and a curse.
Always cool stuff you can do. So, and just for a quick point of context, something our company does is actually help people set up their Follow-Up Boss and maintain it. We'll drop a link in the chat to a little more what we do, or if you want to grab a call with Joey, our CEO, to learn more. But yeah, we live in this world of setting up Follow-Up Boss, people using it, making sure they're using it well, training people around using it. So yeah, really powerful tool. It's interesting. Ponds are somewhat new. Everybody used to find these workarounds because you can add collaborators in Follow-Up Boss. So we go into people's accounts, and some lead would have like 30 collaborators, and nobody knew who was in charge, or are you going to call them, or am I going to call them? So ponds have been a really cool way to do a couple of things. I think one, store old leads for prospecting, things like that. We're going to go through the full guide here in just a minute, but that shared access is really the key. Yep. So, Bridget, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, I think, pull up our guide here. And yeah, if you guys have questions, drop them in the chat, drop them in the Q&A. Sometimes the Q&A is a little easier to make sure we don't miss anything, but you're welcome to use either. We'll be sure we tackle any questions, but I'm going to dive right in. And we will share this guide and this webinar. Our webinars are always recorded. We will send them out. I usually get them out within about an hour of finishing them. So everyone on will get a copy of this guide, or everyone registered. But let's just tackle some use cases right up front, Bridget. Like, there's a couple of kind of overt use cases. So why don't you run us through some of these?
Yeah, so starting out with the first to claim or duty day lead. So, a good example of this would be, home light type leads or anything like that, where you can't necessarily have them assigned to a specific agent when they get into the database, but you still want your agent to be able to go and to get that lead if they're the first one to make the call or take the action on it. So really just giving them the opportunity to have the lead in the database and just go and claim it for themselves and be able to be the one to work that lead, since they're the ones who claimed it, maybe in Slack or whatever protocol you guys have that leads up to that.
Yeah. And speaking of protocols, good to have a best practice around that. Should they claim the lead and then contact it? Should they contact it and only claim it, meaning assign it back to themselves once they interact? Be sure you have a good strategy around that, because it's important that that's the case. So yeah, older leads for prospecting, obviously. Bridget, you want to tackle that, and then we'll make sure we talk about the automatic motion to a pond at some point too.
Yeah. So just older, dead, stale leads, maybe they kind of dropped off your radar. Throwing them into a pond and letting other agents have the opportunity to go and try to reprospect some of those people getting newer agents some leads to be able to work to. It's really, it gives people the option to not have it just tied to them. Maybe there's another agent on your team that has a different sort of approach that could maybe turn that person from just a lead into an active client for you. And so it kind of gives the availability for them to be able to go and do that.
Right. Yeah, I really love that. We actually work with a lot of people and recommend sometimes too, when you get a new agent, have them just work upon first. Let them call some old leads, learn the system, understand how the phone number works and things like that. It's a really good way to kind of get people in before they get on leads, or say, hey, go claim 25 pond leads, or even if you grab 25 pond leads and assign to them, kind of those, long-term nurture people that, maybe unsubscribe. So all you can do is give them a phone call, things like that.
Mhm.
But that's a really good use, and something that we may or may not get into a little bit later. You can also set up a little bit of a system to where when your leads become older, if they haven't engaged, they can move to the pond automatically, which is a good thing to do, especially if you're not of the ability of checking every couple of months, like who's old and who's long-term nurture and where you can move them. So, and you kind of mentioned this earlier, Bridget, but let's talk just a little bit more about Homeline Fast Expert, because those systems don't work as well with Follow Up Boss for routing.
Mhm. Yeah, it's not intuitive as much as Follow Up Boss can do. It's not quite intuitive enough to know who's making that first phone call to be getting that lead and converting and getting that information. So it really just creates that opportunity for people to not have to rely on it going to a random person when they weren't even the person who made the phone call and things like that.
Right. Or having somebody reassign it or go in or figure that out. So really good use for that. We have a couple people using that. It seems to be working really well. Vendors and shared contacts. This has been a passion for a while. People are starting to come around to this, but yeah, any sort of shared contact, Pond is a great use for that.
Yeah, it prevents having duplicates in your system and in your database. And, it just gives the opportunity for, if something happens, maybe a photographer canceled last moment or something, an agent can just go into their vendor pond, look for a photographer and be able to have one right there and then for him. You do need to be a little cautious since they are in a pond. You can see all of the communications from any agent with that person in that profile. So maybe be a little bit more cautious, especially with things like lawyers and mortgage information, things along those lines. But other than that, it's a really good use case to just kind of have all your vendors in one place for everybody to have access to.
Yeah. And as this says, we recommend tagging them. So you can have one vendor pond and then they can be tagged photographer, inspector, any of those things for pretty easy to find them.
Mm-hmm.
And then recruiting, we've been focusing more on this with people lately too. Like Pond is a really great way to keep your recruiting people either separate off your radar, or if you have multiple recruiters working from the same group of people. It's a really, really great use for that. You can use things like last communication filters to see, hey, we haven't reached out to this guy in 3 months or whatever. Bridget, anything else you kind of see in recruiting ponds that's working for people?
Doing the pond in tandem with maybe a couple of custom fields too, to help you kind of stay on top of where maybe they are in the process of recruiting with you. Kind of using those two together, I've seen a lot of powerful things happen.
Cool. Yeah, we started recommending this rather than having separate recruiting stages, because that's global and everybody sees them. So it's helpful to, you can still use your hot, long-term nurture stages, but they're separated out and no agent's going to accidentally call and say, hey, do you or anyone need to buy a house?
Mm-hmm.
So recruiting is a really great use for that. Big fan of that. And then when they join your team, you can just add them as a regular contact, so they're in your Follow Up Boss for team maintenance or brokerage maintenance. Unresponsive, obviously similar to the other one, but Bridget, you want to talk a little bit about that and some of the setup we do sometimes to move people?
Yeah, to get them there automatically. Even one less thing for your agents to be doing in Follow Up Boss, because that's kind of the key, right? So the unresponsive leads, this is especially effective. Like if you have somebody on a nurture plan running for a while. Maybe they were on the plan for about a year and they just still never responded back to any of your sort of engagement. Hopefully you were still trying to make some phone calls and text messages thrown in there as well. But once they kind of hit that level of, all right, it's clear that after this amount of time, this person probably isn't going to be trying to engage back with us. Have them just fall into like a certain stage or get them tagged with something that can just automatically go ahead and take them away from that agent and put them into a pond so that somebody else can go try at a later date. Like we talked about, new recruits, anything along those lines. We like to use the stage called fish. Seems appropriate for us. All the fish live in the pond. So once they've really just expired that nurturing plan, they jump to a fish, which essentially is just a longer term nurture plan. And all the little fishies live in the pond until you fish them out.
That's right. I like it. Cool. And yeah, servicing multiple areas. We have people that have teams in multiple locations or brokerages in multiple locations. So having those ponds, set up or designated appropriately. We're going to get into the actual setup and use of the ponds here in just a little bit, but it's a much easier way to only say like, hey, my Texas agents only need to see the Texas pond versus like, hey, go in there and call some people. And then your people are saying crazy stuff or whatnot. I actually just came up with another use case in my brain that I think isn't on here, but we'll go there in a second.
So many.
I know there's so many. I just thought of one. Past clients too, not a bad way to differentiate and make sure they're not tied in with your other leads potentially.
Mm-hmm.
Do not contact leads is another really good use of this. Really gets them off people's radar. Nobody's going to accidentally call them or reach out. There are things you can do between tagging and other things like that in there as well to make sure that doesn't happen. Actually, in fact, my thing that I just remembered that we've definitely done and is in a recent video I made, if somebody leaves the team and you want those, like if there's some reason you need to keep some of those leads separately, or you're leaving their sphere in there because they had you're not going to reach out to them, but because they had some transactions, you want to keep your numbers straight. Another great use of like, hey, we're not going to call your people, but we are going to track if some of your old leads or something happens with those contacts.
Yep.
Yeah, credit repair is another good one. Bridget, you want to handle that?
Yeah, just some of those people, they need a little extra help, and so they're not quite ready to go through everything, got a little bit of work to do, but you just want to handle them differently than you're going to handle somebody who says, oh, I'm just not ready at this time. You want to try to help get them the right stuff and just kind of keeping them in that little pond bucket, knowing that those are the ones who need to work on the credit repair so that you can provide them with the right materials that you need to, and just, kind of give them a little special attention.
Right. Yeah. Different message, or if you have a certain lender assigned who helps with credit repair, if they're in Follow Up Boss, they could have access to that pond, obviously. Lots of cool stuff you could do. Same with rentals. Great. We've seen a lot of people use this. This is cool.
Yeah, rentals are an interesting because they're still probably going to go through that same process of hot, warm, cold, things like that. But a lot of people will try to do like separate rental stages versus their sales stages. So this kind of gives you the opportunity to have all of your rental inquiries all in one place, knowing specifically that these are people that are going to be renting. They're not going to buy or sell. They don't need to know, what the steps are for the buying process, but it also does give you the opportunity to market to them to try to convert them into a buyer as well.
Right. Yeah. Or controlling, if you have 3 agents on your team that do rentals, then they can be in the rental pond and not other people. So just another kind of organizational tactic. And I love this one. You guys came up with this. I'd never even thought about this. Outgoing referrals, a great way to track them without making sure somebody's not like calling them every day.
Yeah, it's a good one.
Keep your notes in there. Hey, this is gone. Oh, we called Friday and they're under contract now. Like that's such a good idea. I really love that one. So we included a video here, link to a video here with some details on setting up ponds, a YouTube video. But we're going to go ahead and hop in here just into a live Follow Up Boss and look at that. So only an admin or owner level user can create ponds, but anyone can gain access to those ponds. So you go to admin ponds, and this is a demo account. You can see we've got some, I always get, people are always like, what's the gold mine pond? I'm like, I don't know. We just made it up. We were on a webinar, and there it is. But you can create as many of these as you want. Be sure to name them well. That's key. The people can actually find them. If you're going to create a new one, you just hit add pond. You need a name. This pond agent is really key. This is what is called the pond lead. One of the biggest, there's two major factors that happen here. The pond lead will be notified if a pond, depending on some settings, but if a pond lead does something, typically they will be notified. There is a setting to notify everybody in the pond versus the lead. It's a power up that's in beta. You may or may not have that at this time, but the most important thing is that the pond lead is going to be the person that any action plans come from. So if you've got somebody on an action plan, like a long-term nurture, and you move them to a pond, be mindful, this is going to be the name that they're going to see. The pond lead is always going to be the name on the marketing. So that's a really important differentiation. And then below is just any users that need to have access to go in to find and to go in and potentially use that pond. So if it's something like a vendor pond, you probably want a lot of people on it. If it's a Florida West Coast, maybe you only have, one or two or a few people on it. But this is where you would control that. And again, like we said, make sure you name it well. And you can edit all of this after the fact. So if you're going to change the name, you can even change the pond lead and who's in it. One quick tip, if you are using these ponds pretty well, you might be sure you add it to your Follow Up Boss onboarding. So if you need to add them to this group, add them to the old leads pond, make sure that is, part of your process. So who has access to that pond.
Yeah, that's a great.
Bridget, anything else on the setup? I mean, they're pretty easy to set up. That's probably the easiest part.
I was going to say that is the easiest part of the pond, without a doubt. Yeah, no, I really like how you said, make sure that you're naming it something so you know exactly what it is. That's really key. We do see a lot of times people have, pond A, pond B, pond C. Okay, but what does that mean exactly? What is pond A? Who's going? Is that actually your rental pond? Then name it a rental pond. Just be very clear and precise to the point.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to jump a little bit ahead, Bridget, just because we're here and we're in Follow Up Boss, but wanted to cover that how you get to a pond. So if you're listed here, if you're an admin or an agent, you're probably going to see all of them. I'm sorry, an admin or owner, you're probably going to see all of them. If you're an agent, you're only going to see the ones that you're assigned to. And this can be a little confusing for people. So when you're here in All People, if you're an agent, you've probably never had anything here because you only see your leads. Once you're added to a pond, you have the ability to go to a pond. And it can be a little confusing at first. And Bridget made a great point. Sometimes people leave it on the pond or somebody else in your account and goes to the pond. And then you log back in, you're like, wait, where's all my leads? You do have to toggle back. You should still have a me button. If you toggle to me, these are your real contacts, not in the pond.
Yeah, definitely be mindful that, I'm in Follow Up Boss all the time and plenty of different accounts and don't realize that I'm in the pond and I'm like, oh my gosh, what the heck? Where did everybody go? What is going on? They were all just right here. And then I'm like, oh, hello, I'm in the pond. Duh. So just being mindful, 9 times out of 10, if you think that you lost all of your people, it's just because you're in a pond.
Right. And then again, depending on your permission level and which ponds you have, there is a view all ponds, which isn't incredibly useful because like we just talked about, sometimes you want them to be segmented. That's kind of the point. This is a little bit of an advanced use, but I'm going to show it just really quick. There is a pond column. So under assigned, if you check the pond column, you can at least see this pond column. Oh, there it is. There's my Zoom window, of course. And you can move it around. You can resize it. You can still filter just like anything else in a list. So if you wanted to, for some reason, say this, or if you wanted to build a smart list that had this pond with phone numbers that are more than 3 years old, you can still use these same filters in a pond. And then the other cool thing is, while you're in this pond, let me go to a specific pond to make it a little more overt. You can still use your same smart list. Now, this may or may not be useful depending on the content of the pond, but your smart list still remain, and the same criteria are there, but I'm only looking at pond leads over here. And so again, just something to strategize as you're potentially setting this up. Like, do we want to be able to use some of these same smart lists? Do we need a different pond smart list? What does that look like? So, Bridget, is there anything else you can think of in Follow Up Boss? Maybe we'll hop back when we do the automations, but anything else to show here in Follow Up Boss as far as setup and basic use?
I don't think I like that you just touched on like potentially having a smart list for ponds. I think a really great one is people who are in a pond who have recent activity, especially if you've got your Pixel installed, Ylopo, anything along those lines. So that way, yeah, they're in the pond, they're off your radar. Maybe they were non-responsive at one point, but if they're active and they're looking at your website again, maybe it was just the wrong place at the wrong time to begin with. So it kind of lets you know these people are looking again. An agent needs to reach out and to try to see what they're looking at, get them shown, get them in a house, showing some properties. So pond people aren't always completely dead is the point.
Right. Right. But part of the magic is getting them off your radar potentially until they're till they want to do that. And you can click on this last activity and sort new to old. So if you add that column, this will show you people that have been recently active. We're going to show you guys a cool automation that we'll share that does some of this for you in just a minute. So, but yeah, let's hop back through here. And again, that video covers most of that. Claiming a lead. This would be pretty important. I guess I'll back into the link. But so let's just say use case that I go in, I call this guy, and he's like, oh yeah, that's so funny that you called. I was just thinking about, it's time for me to circle back on this and do this. The agent over here is what assigns them to the pond. And so if you're going to work with this person, you're going to want to come back in here and reassign it to yourself. You want this lead now. This is not up for grabs. You're claiming it. You can also do this in bulk, but again, be careful. And of course, there's only one person in here, but in bulk, you can click on the icon up here and assign agent. This is also the way you would bulk assign people to a pond. So you could say assign pond if you were in your regular account to move people to a pond.
Yeah. And a quick thing, make sure when you are doing that assignment that you click the check mark to actually assign it to yourself, or else you're going to be like, oh my gosh, I was talking to John Wick. Where did he go? See, didn't click it there. Still in the pond. Got to love those check marks.
Yes, good call. And you can hit return or the green check mark, or enter or whatever you call it. But yeah, very key to close the loop on that. Like we mentioned before, just having a policy around it. Do you claim them, then call them? Do you call them and then claim them if they answer? That's highly advised. So like we just mentioned, manually, I'm going to come out of this pond. I can show that example. But let's just say, I'd added that filter. So let's just say you're like, all right, well, show me as an admin or an owner. Let's see if we got created on here. That Zoom window's really giving me a hard time. So if you have the created thing up here and you just want to say, look, everybody who's still in stage lead, who's probably going to be everybody in this demo account, who was created, more than 180 days ago, maybe nobody, I don't know when we started this account. Now we've drilled down to like, these are people still in the lead stage that are 180 days old. These are probably not hot prospect. I mean, they might be, but nobody's updated their stage. So as an owner and an admin, you can come in here, select all of these people and just bulk drop them into a pond. And then of course, when you do that, I'll ask you which pond and all that jazz.
Yep.
I'm not going to do that to leave that there. So, but hopping back in here, Automations are great. So automations can move people into a pond or out of a pond. You want to give some examples we've used, Bridget?
Yeah, so we kind of touched a little earlier on like that fish stage one. Once they hit that fish stage, we've got an automatic set up so that they're just going to go and get dumped right on into the pond. If you're using a certain tag, maybe if you have a renter or something and you wanted to tag them as a renter and then they automatically go into the rental pond. Those are really the biggest ones, I think, as far as automations are concerned,
Yeah,
that we see people utilize the most.
right. So you don't have to remember that after 100 days, they need to go into the pond necessarily, because the action plan could run for that many days, change the stage to fish. The automation says if stage change equals fish, move to pond. And now your database is a lot cleaner instead of having a bunch of old people sitting around in the lead stage still.
Yes,
And
nobody
we'll talk
wants.
about the automation to get people out in just a minute. And we kind of covered this, but Bridget, obviously, if you want to mention a little more, just action plans can do this as well.
Yeah, so it's really the action plan that's driving that automation that we just talked about. So essentially, you're going to have it as a stage change. So you can make it just immediately, just the action plan itself is a stage change. So as soon as it goes to fish or wherever, they automatically are going into that pond. Or like I kind of mentioned earlier too, if you have like a whole long nurture plan that runs on somebody for a year, have the last step be changing their stage to fish, tag them, went through the nurture plan, and just drop them in the pond. And it's just one less thing, again, for your agents to have to think about doing. It's just done for them.
Right. Yeah, I love that. And I love Heather just mentioned a cool one. The idea of also, hey, Heather, learned it has an interesting pond, said 2 years in the database and no contact. That's another really smart, or no contact for 90 days. That's a really smart use of that, because it's kind of like at this point, they're fair game for anything. Like if you haven't called them in 90 days and they've been in there for 2 years, then
something's going on.
Probably better off. And again, if you use a system like Ylopo or something like that, that can potentially say, hey, this guy was back on my site, or hey, this guy opened your email. It's good again to get them off your radar, but to be notified when something does happen. So we've got these 2 automations. This is a cool one. So this is the pond lead activity. I shared this in a couple of the Facebook groups not too long ago. And credit to our friend and client, Anthony Malafronte, for actually figuring this out. And then we built it with him. This is when somebody takes action in a pond, if they acquire again, or save or favor or do something of the property, it actually, this automation, and again, you can click on this to just get a link to it and hit it to go in your account. You want to check the settings, of course, but it'll reassign an old pond lead when it takes action. In my mind, this is more powerful than a brand new lead sometimes. This is like the dude that's been in there for 5 years that came back on the site and was like, ooh, now I'm looking at stuff. So we love the idea of reassigning those almost like a new lead. You could do a first to claim or round robin. And you can even attach a note. I can't remember if our automation has a note on it, but one other cool thing in the automation you can do is add a note so that the agent gets a quick note that says, hey, this is actually an old lead. Like, read the notes before you call them. Mm-hmm. So you can have a little context when you call instead of like, hey, you were just on my website. And then this is the one Bridget was talking about, where if you have the fish stage or want to add the fish stage, which this automation will actually do for you, when people are moved to fish, whether automatically or manually, they'll move into that pond. So these, in some sense, kind of work in tandem. This will get the people there off your radar. This one will reassign it when they're
they need to be on your radar.
Right, exactly. So we already covered this, but I'm glad you added that, Bridget, because that was key. Like sometimes they're like, where's my leads? Oh, right. So like we showed before, click on the everyone or me, maybe in your case, drop down. You can go there. And then we mentioned the smart list thing a little bit, but just want to reiterate that. And you also give a little Step Brothers love.
There's so much room for activities with ponds.
So much you can do. It's amazing. So, and then we've got a number of resources here in this guide. Again, we'll send this guide out with the recording. Yeah, so a couple links here. Again, that overview video that I have that we showed out recently, we have a Follow Up Boss handbook template that you can use and customize. We find it's just key to have a written plan on what do these stages mean, what smart list should you be working every day, which one should you work weekly. We have an onboarding template where you can add to old leads pond when new people join. And a number of other things. I'm not going to read through all these, but we also have these webinars every second Wednesday. I started getting those mixed up. And I also host Follow Up Boss office hours, which are every first and third Thursday. So we've got a couple of links in there, some prior recordings of our webinars. Yeah, and links to connect with us if that's something that you want to do, or grab a call with Joey, our CEO, to learn more. Any other quick questions if you want to throw to us, we're happy to tackle. Bridget, you want to kind of overview, maybe take us out with, why do we love ponds, and why are we doing a whole webinar on ponds?
I just feel like ponds are truly an underutilized asset of Follow Up Boss. And I mean, you did mention before, it's relatively newer for some of those people who, have been power users throughout the years for Follow Up Boss, but it just helps you dial in on specific people in a better way, since you don't want to have multiple stages for things and have all the right people lumped in the right places.
Awesome. Yeah, no, that's perfect. And yeah, Heather just dropped another note. Yeah, you got to do it. And I maybe say this too much, but here's the thing. You're probably not going to break anything in Follow Up Boss. Like, be mindful of what you're doing. Don't dump like 10,000 leads into the pond and forget about them. But the reality of it is, you can play around, set one up, move a couple people in, and make a fake dummy lead, put it in there, put them on an action plan. Like, there's not much you can do to go wrong. And especially if you have this automation where if somebody does take action, they're going to be back on your radar. It's just such a good use case. And again, I think the recruiting thing is big too, especially if you have multiple people potentially recruiting, or we work with somebody that encourages their agents to help recruit. And so all the agents have access to this pond. We dumped a huge, school licensee list, I think, into it, and their agents can go in and recruit. And if they get somebody to come over, they get, a piece of their first couple of deals or things like that. So, yeah, and Heather also mentioned that kind of interaction between ponds and smart lists. Like, it's funny, yeah, they're almost like cousins. Like, in some sense, they're designating people for you to connect with and kind of keep it clean. But yeah, I love, and then again, you can use ponds in your smart list criteria. So if you're worried that your agents aren't going to go to a pond or they're going to forget, you can just make a smart list that's like all pond leads with phone numbers or whatever. So perfect. Cool. Well, let me check the chat real quick to see if we have any more quick questions. Yeah, I love that. Awesome. Cool. Well, appreciate you guys being on. Again, we do these monthly, so love to have you join. I know a lot of times when I send out the recording, I see we have consistent people, so we certainly always love to have you back. And if you're new, appreciate you joining. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you guys soon on the next webinar.
Yeah, same time next month. We will see you again.
Love it. Y'all take care.
Thanks, y'all.